Welcome to Super Cool, the show tracking the rise of the low-carbon economy, a multi-trillion-dollar transformation reshaping global industries. Each week, we spotlight the climate technologies, business models, and strategies already cutting carbon, boosting profits, and improving modern life. I'm your host, Josh Dorfman. If you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to subscribe or leave a review wherever you listen. And if you want to go deeper into super cool climate solutions now scaling up market, check out our weekly newsletter. You can find it at getsuper.cool. Raghu Belur is the kind of founder who defines the American dream. He came to the US as a young man from India to study electrical engineering at Texas A&M University. He moved to Silicon Valley, worked at half a dozen startups, learned, grew professionally, absorbed the most essential Silicon Valley maxims. Semiconductors and software reshape old industries and build new ones. Centralized systems give way to decentralized ones. And technology scales when you design for cost, reliability, performance, and above all, the customer. In 2006, Raghu took everything he'd learned and decided to build the future. Not all at once, that wouldn't be practical. He and co-founder Martin Fornage focused on a single idea no one thought possible, giving every solar panel its own brain. Instead of building one big inverter on the side of a house, what if each panel had its own microinverter? A semiconductor-based device that can turn DC power to AC, optimizing energy generation at the source, panel by panel, home by home. That idea took off. Today, Enphase microinverters power 5 million homes across the US and around the world. They're manufactured in Texas and South Carolina. American-made technology now exported globally. In a moment when the US is focused on bringing back manufacturing, Enphase is already here, building the low-carbon future and shipping it abroad. In the process, it's gone from startup to publicly traded company, now valued at $5.5 billion. Raghu has joined the ranks of immigrants who have built 44% of America's tech unicorns, those rare startups that scale into billion-dollar-plus companies and power the American economy. But that's only half the story. From the start, Raghu and Martin's vision was bigger than solar. It all comes back to how technologies evolve, becoming decentralized, distributed as they mature. Most of you are probably listening to this podcast on your phone, a computer in the palm of your hand with more processing power than the most advanced mainframes of 75 years ago. That's the future Raghu saw for energy. Solar was the entry point. The vision was to turn every home into a self-contained, intelligent power plant, generating energy, storing it, managing it, and one day sharing it with the grid, with neighbors, with the system as a whole. Not just as utility customers, but as partners. That future is no longer far away. In fact, in many places, it's already here. To Raghu, it's logical, inevitable. In a world where electrification of cars and homes is surging, the grid can't keep up. Add the needs of data centers, AI, and industry, and this grid that took 150 years to build simply can't expand fast enough to meet the moment. It needs partners. And those partners, millions upon millions of homes. Today, Enphase has scaled its business to make that future work. Its products now include batteries, EV chargers, and intelligent software designed to work together seamlessly, plug and play. Homeowners don't need to think about the complexity. They just say yes to the system, and Enphase takes care of the rest. But behind that simplicity is cutting-edge software, hardware, design intelligence, and a nimble supply chain. That's how you build the low-carbon future. And that's Raghu's story. Here's our conversation. Raghu, welcome to Super Cool.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you for having me here.
Let's start with the background on Enphase, kind of founding story. I know when you started the company, which now goes back some years, this was not your first startup by any means. Right. Tell us about your background and what led to Enphase, a little bit of that journey.
Our journey, while not very traditional for folks outside of Silicon Valley, it was pretty middle of the road, I would say, for folks from around here. So I started the company with a very close friend of mine who I met, Martin Fornage, that's his name. I met him at a previous startup. And our journey was very similar. We were both immigrants. He came from France, I came from India. We were both electrical engineers. We both met at our second startup and stayed friends. We loved technology, learned a lot from that particular startup, which was a telecommunications startup back in the internet transformation. And so learned a lot about technology and how technology evolves and became foundational in our thinking as it pertains to Enphase. Subsequent to that, we both went off and joined different startups. He went back to telecommunications. I joined a security startup, an SSL VPN startup. And then we both decided to start a wireless company in telecommunications. That's what we knew. And we went through that journey. And of course, that journey ended not very well. And then we both were doodling on a whiteboard December of '05, thinking about, okay, what have we learned? And what's unique about what we have learned? What insights have we gained? And realized that one of the things we learned in the long run, technology always moves to a decentralized or a distributed architecture. Things don't get centralized. In network parlance, what that means is more and more intelligence gets pushed deeper into the network. And the endpoints make autonomous, intelligent decisions. That was kind of the foundational thinking, if you may, for us. We started looking at energy. And we said, wow, look at how the energy industry has not evolved, right? We have these massive centralized generation, transmission, substation, distribution infrastructures, and not very intelligent homes. So we said, wow, that hasn't changed in over 100 years. I've joked about this in the past when I said, look, if Edison or Tesla or Westinghouse were walking down the streets of Fremont, California, and they looked up at the infrastructure, they would probably recognize all elements of it.
Mm-hmm.
So something has to change there, obviously. And then, consistent with our thinking, the change needs to be in a direction where things get decentralized or distributed. So, what that means is, hey, how about making the home the unit of intelligence? That's the end of the network. Make that the unit of intelligence. All homes are hyper-connected network. They're hyper-aware of each other, but we have an opportunity to effectively rebuild the grid from the inside out, one home at a time. The home is the unit of intelligence. That was our thinking. Of course, we didn't want to go try to rebuild the entire grid as a tiny little startup. That was our grand vision. We needed to start somewhere, and obviously we started looking at solar and said, okay, let's start with solar.
Thank you for that. When I was getting ready to speak with you, I heard you say that, and it really struck me. And you had talked about computers and the evolution of computers from giant mainframes to an iPhone. You even talked about what happens in data centers, and there's now thousands of different modular computers in a data center. So the inevitability of decentralization, it really got me thinking about where the grid is going. I think there's forces today that we'll talk about that are saying, well, you know what? The answer is probably yes. The question will probably be how fast and how far and how do we get there? But it's interesting to me that you had this vision 20 years ago and said the way we get a toehold here is we're going to do a micro inverter, something different to make
Yeah.
a solar panel better. Can you talk to us about that? And the thing that I'll say, it just always reminds me when I hear stories like this, and it's not that often, but you say, we're going to start with a microinverter, and everyone's like, oh, you see Enphase? Well, what are they? Oh, they're a microinverter company. Meanwhile, you're like, just wait and see, because
Yeah.
this is step one in a
The
master
vision is
plan.
grander than that,
Yeah.
without a doubt. And solar was the first entree into it, but we also had this vision from the very beginning that we were not solving a solar problem. We were actually solving an energy problem. So we were very deliberate in naming the company Enphase Energy and not Enphase Solar, because the moment we named it Enphase Solar, that was not our goal. Our mission always was to rebuild the energy infrastructure. We didn't know the details. Of course, we didn't know the details. In hindsight, we can claim we knew it, but we didn't. We're like focused on, okay, let's solve the solar problem. But then we also thought about the way solar is done. Even today, everything is done centralized, which means you have dumb solar panels and all the power conversion management all happens in one big box string or central inverter. So we said, okay, let's disrupt that. Instead of making a big box inverter, let's make tiny microinverters and put them at the back of every solar panel. We're like, oh, that seems obvious. I'm sure somebody's tried it, and somebody had tried it. But here's where I think they had not succeeded. They took a big box inverter and just shrunk it down. And we said, no, that's going to fail. If you think back on all of those technology that we talked about, you mentioned mainframe computers, the phones, the laptops, etc. The common thread that runs through all of them is semis and software, semiconductor and software. Aha, that's what we do. That's what enables success in those industries. It's core to it. Imagine a world of giant computers all based on analog. We wouldn't be sitting here having this discussion, right? So we said, let's reinvent that device called the microinverter, but we'll do it as a semiconductor and software device. That's what we were known for. That's what our experience had been. It was all a digital device, and that's how we started. Now we were the first guys to say, yeah, this thing can last for 25 years. It's not a power device. It's a piece of power electronics. Then we took it a step further and they said, okay, so if it's all done in digital, that means you can define its operation in software. So it became immediately software defined. And there were a bunch of benefits to making it software defined. And then the third thing that we did was, hey, it's got to be a system. It cannot just be a piece of hardware sitting on the back of a solar panel. Yes, it makes a solar panel more intelligent, but we need to have it fully networked. So we embedded its full stack software, embedded communications technology, gateway cloud. And so all our systems were really hyper aware of each other, but they all acted autonomously. This is at the solar piece. Mm-hmm. But then we knew that solar piece had to evolve into an energy element, into an energy system. And that came a few years later with the first thinking around, how do I take the intermittency out of solar? Solar, while free, is still not a dependable source of energy, in the sense that if there's cloud cover, you're going to have less solar. At night, you don't have solar at all. So how do I take some of the intermittency of solar out? We started thinking about storage, energy storage and batteries, and said, okay, yes, we're going to take our step into batteries or energy storage without compromising our original thinking of decentralization and distributed architectures. So that's how we came up with this notion of what we call an AC coupled system, where solar and battery both attach each other on your AC wiring that runs in your house. They act, again, independent, autonomous of each other, but they are all hyper-connected through the networking system, and software ties it all together.
And if you're basing your system on semiconductors and software, learning from other industries, learning from your experience in Silicon Valley, that also means that you can see into the future and you can see a cost curve. You can see, well, if we're going to do semiconductors and software, we may start at a place that's a little bit uncomfortable, but we know as we get to scale, as we improve the tech, we're going to become very cost competitive. We're going to have much more control over our destiny, I assume, if you start to go down that development path.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The reason why things become decentralized or distributed, because for cost, performance, and reliability reasons. You get better cost, you get better performance, you get better reliability over time. The difference between semiconductor-based systems versus, say, a big box inverter that uses a lot of copper and iron is copper and iron are incompressible in terms of cost. That's material cost. It's just raw material. Whereas with silicon, I can add more and more integration of functions into silicon. And I'm on an cost curve that doesn't asymptote. Again, at the time we were thinking this is all silicon-based technology. And look at where we are headed now. We are on the cusp of releasing our next generation product that's based on a wide bandgap technology, a whole new technology called gallium nitride. GaN. That puts us on a whole new trajectory for cost reduction and better performance and better reliability, right? Sitting back in 2008, we didn't know there was GaN coming, and that would have been like 18, 20 years later. But you do have this belief that the semiconductor world will figure out the next technology to drive the cost curve down. We were the first guys to adopt silicon carbide, for example, another technology that we had adopted, and we used that for a long time. And then we went back to traditional silicon, and now we are transitioning into this new world of gallium nitride, which just opens up endless possibilities. The things that you can do to power electronics with that technology is, yeah, you can let your imagination go as wild as you would like. That's the exciting part, right?
Yeah, that definitely comes through. Today, if you take a snapshot of Enphase, your products are in millions of homes, both in the US and internationally. You've advanced the microinverter. Even that product has tons of intelligence in it. You're advancing battery technology. Enphase batteries are being installed in homes. Enphase EV chargers are being installed in homes. There's all of these different devices in the home. And then there's like the brain, the home energy management system. One of the things you've said that resonates deeply with me is you've talked about, look, on the back end within Enphase, as we either develop product or think about what we're building, it's complex. Of course, there's a lot of technology. There's a lot that we need to do to make sure on the front end, all these things we want to do for the home are plug and play, dead simple, reliable, high performance, right cost, easy to install. So can you talk a bit about that philosophy and that development process?
When a new industry begins, for example, like we saw back in the back with telecom, where we used to have those plain old telephone systems, analog devices, and a central office, and that migrated to a digital world and smartphones, etc. Over time, what happened, and this happened in solar as well, in the beginning, people invest in point products. Hey, I have a better inverter for solar, or I have a better battery, or I have a better solar panel, for example. We're thinking about crystalline, and we thought about thin film and other technologies as well. But as markets begin to mature, the end consumer is expecting solutions, not point products. Even the installer in our case, who's the one is like, it's a consultative sale, they're the ones who kind of build the system for the homeowner, don't want to bother with mixing and matching things and trying to make everything work. They expect that companies are actually providing solutions to them. Solutions both in terms of the product that they provide, but post-sale support and then maintenance of that product over a 25-year life. So that was really important for us as well, that we couldn't just stay as a solar inverter company. In fact, I don't think if there was a new startup today that said, hey, I'm a solar inverter, and by the way, it's 5 cents a watt cheaper, that suddenly people would go, oh, that's great, I'm going to migrate to that. And some people may try that, but that's not how people think. Many more people think, I want an energy system. And that energy system today consists of solar and batteries and EV chargers and managing your loads like heat pumps, etc. And all of that is tied together with very sophisticated software. But as you can imagine, going from solar to something as sophisticated as all of this adds complexity. And that's the key, is you cannot add complexity from the point of view of the installer or the homeowner. It's got to be absolutely simple, simple, simple. So for the homeowner, if we have a beautiful app, they can go to the app, they can look at how their system's doing, look at all the details of the system, how a specific panel is performing, how a specific battery is performing, when did their EV get charged, how many electrons went into the EV when it got charged, or never look at it. I expect that they'll never look at it. The system is still operating really well. It's giving them the best performance, the best economics. It's the cleanest, it's the safest, and it's the most reliable system. That's our mindset. And we are always striving to get them.
I would imagine as I'm hearing you talk about this, learnings over your career, the co-founding team, I'm guessing you had this sensibility because it sounds so ingrained in you as you're talking about what needs to happen for the homeowner. Now, you start with a single product. Okay, you need to get into market. You start with the inverter, but you have this vision around solutions. And this comes up a lot on our show. Once you're scaling up market and you're beyond the early adopters who are like, oh, yeah, tell me about I'm actually interested in the inverter. Like most people don't care at all. Most people just want the solar panel to make energy that's cost effective. And I just want to make sure if there's an outage, my lights stay on. And if there's a way, great for me to get lower prices on energy because there's something working and great. I want the outcomes of peace of mind, control over costs, everything works, right?
Yep.
I think that what we've seen is there's just not a lot of companies, even today, around climate tech, climate solution companies, come at it from that vantage point right from the beginning.
Actually, what you're saying is spot on. We are a bunch of geeks. We start companies like this. We love the tech. We love the product. That's great. That's necessary. But what really matters beyond that, again, we talked about providing simple, easy to install systems, very reliable, high performance systems. But you also have to have absolutely best in class customer service. You have to take care of your customers. So that was a new learning for me personally and for the company as well, that we take extraordinary care of our customers. You look at our net promoter score, we are in the high 70s. This has just happened. You really have to work very, very hard at it. And it's remarkable that if you keep your customer at the core of all your thinking, automatically the right decisions happen in the company in terms of what technology are you building, what should be the product features, etc. Because if you're always thinking, hey, the customer is in the center of all the decision making, you'll absolutely always do the right thing. So I think this kind of learning, I mean, I'm old enough to have experienced that. Yes, tech is great. You can geek out as much as you want on it, but really taking care of your customer is as important, if not more.
Let's switch gears for a second. Let's talk about the manufacturing side for a second. I was watching a video, we're going to link to it, about Enphase's manufacturing footprint in the US, and it was showing Texas, it was showing South Carolina. Really interesting. So you have this American US-based manufacturing footprint. And I know you're global, so I know you're manufacturing elsewhere around the globe as well. But in this moment, there's this climate mission we've talked about, there's this carbon reduction mission, but you're also talking about energy independence. You're really leaning into things that have always been important to Americans. I think this administration prioritizes maybe even more than the previous. You know, Americans want energy independence, manufacturing jobs, American supply chain. That's not easy to do. So we're talking about the elegance of the product and the way this works in a home. Can you take us through the manufacturing side a little bit? You've scaled up so much to get to the place where you are today.
Enphase is now deployed in 5 million homes in about 170 countries. Very high scale. Still very early though. I mean, look at penetration of solar in the US. It's sitting at about 4% or so. Germany is sitting at barely 15%. So we have a long, long ways to go. 96% left in the US, 85% left in a country like Germany. But we are at scale to get there. And so as part of that thinking, as being a global company, one of the things that we had always wrestling with is we needed geodiversity, just from the standpoint of making our business more secure. Yes, we all are mission driven. We all want to save the world, but you do have to be alive to save the world, which means you need to run a very good, healthy, profitable business. And the amazing thing, again, part of my learning was, hey, in clean tech, you can do both. You can save the world and and make a really good business out of it, make a lot of money for your shareholders. Any company that's scaling up like that, you really do think about having geodiversity because we're starting to see the early rumblings around the geopolitical issues. We were obviously weighted in manufacturing in China at the time, but we very quickly started looking at other geographies to manufacture. And again, it really plays to our strength in that our manufacturing strategy is to rely on, it's a very Silicon Valley thing, on contract manufacturers. But we are very deeply embedded in that process. All the testing is all done on our Enphase equipment. So it was relatively easy for us to move our manufacturing to different locations. We started in India, we started up Mexico, and then the previous administration and the credits that they provided us to bring US manufacturing, one of the best things that any administration could have done, because it enabled us to bring a lot of the manufacturing jobs back here into the US. And today, 85% of all microinverters that we make for the worldwide market are made in Texas and in South Carolina. Something that I'm extremely, extremely proud of. But it was not just manufacturing, because we were starting to think, okay, we need to diversify our supply chain as well. So even the components, we started to look for non-China sources so we could have a choice. So we built an AVL or an approved vendor list that had some bench strength to it that said, okay, if it's not this vendor, I can go to this alternate vendor. It's a lot of work because you have to qualify every single device from every single vendor and make sure that it meets the quality and reliability specifications of your system. So a lot of work has gone into moving both the manufacturing and supply chain. And one of the proudest things that I could have done, again, like I said, I'm an immigrant and coming here and doing all these cool things and not making a single product here was a hole. And now we have really filled it. I mean, not only do we manufacture here to meet the demand of the US, but now for the first time we are exporting clean technology to outside the US. So over the last year and a half, we've been exporting our microinverters to other countries as well, products that have been made here in the US. And that's really awesome. And now we are moving battery technology also over here. We have done all the power electronics, the packaging, everything's moved here. We're working on the cell technology next.
Yeah, that is really exciting. What's really exciting about it is the nimbleness also in your operations. I think there's these two dynamics. You've got this American footprint. I mean, there's multiple dynamics. You've got this American footprint. You're in international markets. You are a hardware company and a software company. And of course, the complexity of saying we've gone over 20 years from a startup to really a global player as an energy company. I'm very interested as well in what's happening in some of your international markets. I've seen some of the recent announcements, press releases. I know you have a pretty strong footprint in Europe, but it was some of these maybe even edge cases that are becoming more prevalent, like in how Europe is really prioritizing solar and they're starting to enable balcony solar. I saw something about the Enphase in Belgium. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I want to ask Raghu about that. I saw some of the developments that are happening in Japan. And so some of these markets that we also don't necessarily hear about that you're tapping into. Can you talk to us about Europe and your footprint there and how you're operating?
To answer your original question on the nimbleness, that's enabled by the business model that we have where we rely on contract manufacturing. But there's another aspect that I don't know if a lot of people appreciate. And again, it goes back to that notion of decentralized or distributed architectures. You mentioned the thing about blade servers, right? If you go into a data center, you don't find a monolith, you find thousands of blade servers. So what do? You make one thing and you make a lot of it. We make one device and we make a lot of that one device. So your supply chain becomes very efficient when you do that because you are buying only a fixed set of components. Because all the devices, the hardware that we make, are all software defined. So if I'm in the US, I can say, hey, you are connecting to a US grid, and here are the parameters on how you connect to the US grid, and I do that in software. But it's the same piece of hardware that I take to Europe, and I say, hey, now you're going to run on a 50 hertz grid that connects 230 volts, not 240 volts, line to neutral, not line to line, and I can do that all in software. That has huge manufacturing leverage because I'm making one thing, and then you can manage your supply chain better and you can make things very, very reliable. In fact, we took that notion of a software defined device a step further. Our batteries use the same microinverter that goes on your roof because the power electronics that we have is fully bidirectional. So we can flow power from AC to DC, DC to AC. So I can charge and discharge the battery using that same device. When it's on the roof and I say, thou shall be a solar inverter, the software says, hey, I'm only going to allow power flow from panel to the grid. And then in the case of the battery in software, we say, hey, now I want you to discharge the battery, go from DC to AC, or charge the battery, go from AC to DC, all done in software. Europe, in the spirit of energy independence and choice, one of the things that balcony solar solves are enabling folks that live in apartments to participate in this energy transformation. They were mostly excluded from it because they were just temporary dweller. I mean, you stay in an apartment for a few years and then you move on to a different apartment or buy a home. So this gave them the ability to put solar at a much smaller scale. But it's not just solar. They can be a complete energy system. You can have solar, you can have batteries as well in that system. And so that movement really began in Europe first. And we think that micros obviously are the best fit for it because these are very small systems, maybe 2 panels. So you just use 2 microinverters and you're good to go. But again, we brought to bear all of Enphase's experience in terms of performance, in terms of reliability, in terms of thinking about everything as a system. Hopefully, that movement will grow here in the US as well. We are pretty excited that that's going to happen here. So, balcony solar basically just expands the pool of people who can participate in this energy transition. I think there are some really interesting, bigger transitions that are taking place vis-a-vis how these systems are starting to participate in the energy markets. I think that's a really, really interesting transition, in addition to expanding the pool of people who are now part of the revolution, if you may.
Okay, we're definitely going to talk about that. And I appreciate you talking about what's happening with balcony solar. That's probably going to come here. I was just talking with a company called Shine that's having some traction on setting up solar for multifamily apartments, just figuring out the economics and the software layer to do that. But I also didn't want to lose the thread before we continue, just hearing you talk about your manufacturing and hearing you talk about the hardware layer. We build one thing, then the software layer, which gives us this flexibility to enter multiple markets. But it's like what's really hitting home for me, Raghu, getting a chance to talk to you is just the elegance of the design thinking that goes into Enphase, of really finding where are the leverage points, how do we try to do things as in some respects as simply as possible because there's so much complexity. I find that really fascinating. And when you mention like, hey, okay, if we just do one hardware device, then we control the number of components that are going to go into that and the scale, we're talking about millions and millions of these things. I think for most people who are thinking about distributed energy resources and what's happening in the home and the home as its own mini power grid, most of us have very little appreciation for going back into the supply chain and thinking like, oh, right, there's components and all this stuff actually has to get built somewhere. And so I really appreciate hearing you talk about that. And like I said, this elegance of thinking about how do we try to do something that's so complex and where can we take out complexity to really move fast and build a very profitable business like you've talked about.
Yeah, a lot of it stems from the thinking again, the right approach that we were the first guys to think about, hey, just changing more a digital power conversion technology, build our own custom chip. So we build our own custom ASIC. Actually, I have that. I have the guts of our inverter here, and that's our own custom device there, sitting right there. Right?
Okay, just for
And
our
so,
podcast listeners, because some will see this on video,
yeah, and
he's holding up a device, yeah, as we
it looks
speak.
really simple, but there is incredible amount of complexity in this. As an example, that little device has an embedded processor in it that probably has much more horsepower than the original when we launched the first Saturn V rockets into space and the lunar excursion module that landed on the moon. This thing has probably more compute capability than what was in those devices. And we got 20 of them on the roof. Massive amounts of compute capability. But that's the beauty of semis, and you can add a lot of compute in there for virtually no cost.
Absolutely.
So here's another example of what it does. When I look back 15, 20 years ago, most of the work that those inverters did was power conversion. They took DC from the solar panel, converted into AC that you use in your house. And a very small portion of what it did was how it interacted with the utility grid. Today, I would say barely half of what it does is power conversion. There's so much software in there and intelligence in there and how it interacts with the grid. This is no longer just about what you're doing within the home. The software that we use, the home energy management software, as an example that you mentioned, it's federating power flow amongst all these different disparate devices in order to deliver whatever the homeowner chooses. The best economics, is it best return on investment, pure economics, or combination of economics and carbon optimization as an example, right? While at the same time, we're helping out the grid if needed. So the level of sophistication has gone up a lot. You can look at every home and say, wow, it is like a mini power plant, as you said, that's generating, storing, managing all the energy for the home.
This is a great launch point for the next topic I wanted to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about energy markets. I want to talk to you about the state of where we are and where we're going. I've heard you say if you think about a home today, maybe on an average day, it uses something like 30 kilowatt hours. If you put in an electric car, that add another 15, you put another electric car, you double, now you're at 60, you add a heat pump, now you're at 75, and you start thinking like, Oh my gosh, all the power that's going to start flowing to homes. Okay, you've got solar generating on your roof, but that's still so much more energy load that's going to start going to homes. And then the last thing I'll say is I've heard you talk about, we all know you've got the data centers and the hyperscalers and all of this energy demand on the other side, on the industrial side, the commercial side. I'd love to hear your thoughts on where this is going, what this means for Enphase and the industry and for homeowners, really for the kind of energy markets themselves. Like, where are we today? What does this all mean for us?
So let's tease that apart a little bit. Like you pointed out, demand's going through the roof. Both front of the meter, which is independent power plants and servicing data centers as an example, as well as the home. We were wrestling with the home problem alone, and now we have to deal with the data center problem as well. Or I shouldn't call them a problem, solve the demand requirements. And the demand requirements obviously are growing. That puts incredible pressure on the utilities because it's not just about generating the electrons. You have to deliver those electrons. That infrastructure to deliver those electrons is just not there. I'll give you a very simple example. If you look at the distribution infrastructure, starting with the substation, if you look at the conductors, if you look at the transformer that sits outside your home, and then the conductors that go from your transformer into your main service entrance or your meter, they're all bottlenecks. In fact, that transformer that may be servicing 3 homes is a pretty major bottleneck. It's about 18 kilowatts is a typical, 15 to 18 kilowatts in the US is a typical transformer. A level 2 charger with one EV is at anywhere from 7 to 9 kilowatts. If I charge my car along with my neighbor simultaneously, I'm putting a lot of stress on that transformer. Okay, so let's go upgrade all of these transformers. Oh, that's really not practical. Right? I think I've seen estimates from $50 billion to $100 billion to rip and replace the entire distribution infrastructure in like one state. Sorry, in one utility, forget, not even one state. So it's just not practical to do so. But the question is, can you increase the utilization of the grid with really intelligent systems? Can my system, solar, battery, EV charger, and imagine if that EV charger becomes, when it becomes bidirectional, which it can over the next couple of years, along with my neighbor's system, and if those two systems can cooperate, and my neighbor's neighbor system's also aware now of these systems and they can cooperate, there's a lot of decision that can be made. Like, for example, you could say, hey, I have excess electrons. Why? Because my demand is in home number A has excess electrons or excess energy, excess kilowatt hours, because the demand isn't there. And I can predict based on using AI ML techniques to say what is the forecasted demand for that home over the next 24 hours. I can make a decision to transact my energy using the existing infrastructure over to my neighbor. So instead of thinking about a world that's only what is called behind the meter, which is my meter, my house, we start thinking, expanding our thinking around behind the transformer. These 3-4 homes can now start cooperating and start transacting energy with each other. All interconnections are very dynamic now. It's not a static interconnection anymore. It's not like, okay, you put a 7 kilowatt PV solar system and that's the interconnection. No, it's completely dynamic. Intelligently, I can say, hey, I'm going to push 3 kilowatts onto this wire out of my meter, and then those 3 kilowatts are absorbed right here with my neighbor because they have a demand right now. That's the forecasted demand. All of this technology exists today. You think about this as the maturation of our industry. Maturation of our industry is we are not just about what we do within the home. That's our priority, of course. But now we can start participating in the operation of the entire grid via market signals. If you look, for example, in Europe, which is a completely deregulated market, there are what are called day-ahead markets, meaning energy providers, energy traders are buying energy to meet a demand 24 hours ahead. They may have long-term contracts, but there are markets that are just 24 hours ahead, meaning they're bidding into the market and they buy electrons, X electrons for Y price 24 hours ahead. We can do that at a home level now. For example, in parts of Europe, we have something called as dynamic tariffs, which means at 11 a.m., I get a schedule that says starting at midnight, this is what your buy rate is going to be on an hourly basis. This is how many cents per kilowatt hour you're going to pay per hour starting at midnight. And Here's how many cents per kilowatt hour we'll pay you for exporting electrons. So I
Wow.
can have a system, a software system that looks at historical data, which we have gobs and gobs of, which are very data rich. You can predict what your production is going to be. You can predict what your consumption is going to be. And based on that, you can decide, when do I charge my battery? When do I discharge my battery? When do I buy from the grid? When do I sell to the grid? When do I charge my car? When do I discharge my car? Should I turn on my heat pump? All of this completely in the background without the homeowner intervening, without compromising their comfort and saving them a ton of money. We get negative pricing as an example. There are moments in time because there's so much excess generation in the middle of the day, you'll see negative pricing. And when that happens, what do? You actually turn down your solar because it's all clean electrons. It's okay. You shut down your solar, charge up your batteries, you charge up your car, you turn on your heat pump. It's the best economics. Now, that's the day ahead market. In addition, you can add other markets to it. There's a frequency market, there is a imbalance market, but these are all real market signals. And you're saying, wow, these are DERs, distributed energy resources in the home. These, greenies are now participating in the operation of the grid. How fantastic is this? Because it's not just about us greenies, it's about real economics. It's about people buying solar and energy systems because it makes economic sense.
I love hearing that. What's interesting is we're having this conversation today, 2025, and this doesn't sound like it's too far off. It doesn't sound like this is some future state. It actually sounds like for economic reasons of cost, like you've laid out, of just even to try and actually upgrade, if you're going to try and utilities are going to try and upgrade infrastructure to service the demand that's coming, that's going to be incredibly cost prohibitive. The technology is here. We could do this today or soon, right? And I guess maybe as we're starting to wrap up, for you, Raghu, as you look at Enphase, do you feel like we are nearing this moment where, as you said, like market penetration, yeah, we got millions of customers. So exciting. It's just a fraction of how big this actual market is. Are we on the cusp of that next part of the growth curve for all of the reasons that you've outlined today?
100%. I mean, why would somebody buy an energy system for your home, solar and batteries, etc.? Because it makes economic sense. The utilities are in an unenviable position in some sense. They've got this massive demand coming. It's here. Electrification of the home and data center hyperscalers on the front of the meter. There's massive demand, right? While at the same time, we all know that they need to harden the grid because we are seeing climate events. Nobody's disputing climate events. What does that do? That drives the cost up of your kilowatt hours because they have to upgrade their infrastructure in a volumetric pricing environment that has to be passed on to the homeowner. So energy systems in the home become more and more economical, not less. So the demand is there, becoming more economical. Well, you can do the math. What does that mean? We are going to have a very good acceleration. If you really think about it on a first principles basis, what else am I going to do? How else am I going to service the demand for the home? Nobody's putting SMRs in their backyard, right? You're not doing that. So really, your only solution is solar batteries and home energy management and EVs and smart EVs and bidirectional EVs. That's really the only solution that's available. Nobody's sticking wind turbines in your homes either. That's not going to happen either. So this business, we are in, I wouldn't call it a cusp. It's happening as we speak. All the forces are coming together in the sense that there is the demand. This is the only solution. You need a sophisticated system like an energy system, but the opportunities, what you're going to deliver to the homeowner is really fantastic. A system that's very reliable, very clean, very economical, and very safe. I always think about this. When I go up to a light switch and I flip that light switch on, what do I want? I want that light to come on no matter what. If there's a massive storm outside, I still want that light to come on. I want it to be the most economical kilowatt hour that I've purchased. Hey, what's more economical than me producing my own energy, right? It needs to be, of course, safe, and it's got to be clean.
Definitely. Raghu, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and the journey of Enphase with us. This was an incredibly inspiring conversation, and I'm excited to continue to follow Enphase Energy as you scale and take us with you into the future.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Josh. Really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thanks for listening today. If you enjoyed the conversation and want to support Supercool, the best way to do so is to follow or subscribe to the show and leave a review. That helps others discover it too. See you next time.